see you. Yeah. Oh, feeling good. Tough times. I have, yeah. Hi, Chris. How are you? What do we do?
Good afternoon and welcome to the 1990 Evangelism Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. My name is Scott Davenport, and on behalf of the Youth Evangelism Committee, we have come to share the good news. We hope this afternoon will be filled with fun, fellowship, and a clear understanding of God's evangelistic plan for each one of you and for each one of your lives. At this time, I would like to introduce the Youth Ministry Director of St. Mark's, Sandra McEwen.
The committee expected about 60 people to sign up, and as you know, there are over 500 here. So, I just want to welcome y'all to St. Mark's and Charlotte, and please make yourselves at home and have a good time. And how about right now, so everyone could turn around and meet the person sitting next to you if you don't know them?
All the rest of you to see what a great turnout this is. For some years I have believed that God was doing wonderful things in our midst, and who can doubt it? I think that it is so wonderful to see a new generation like yours, full of renewal, full of excitement, full of freshness. Who knows?
At one of our early meetings, somebody said, what if? What if we decided to take a real risk and have a youth event, an evangelism youth event in connection with the Carolinas Evangelism Conference? The conference itself has a wonderful track record for the last 25 years. We took a chance, and you wouldn't believe those early conversations.
And I am the coordinator for Region 9 of the ELCA. Too bad nobody showed up.
Yeah, too bad nobody's here. Welcome, welcome. And I would like to join with all the others who have said how exciting it is to have so many of you here. And to give us a chance to be involved with you in the Carolina Evangelism Conference and have your presence so well represented today. I want to tell you a story. Well, two. First of all, as I look out and think about how on earth can you do anything with values in 45 minutes with this many people, I'm remembering about 3 or 4 years ago, because Jane Floyd was there, or Daddy, you were there, when we first moved to North Carolina from South Carolina, someone said, how about doing one of the winter conferences with the North Carolina youth on sexuality? And I said, okay. And we ended up with 315 at the Holiday Inn, which is a pretty neat place to be talking about sex, I guess. But 315 people, and we made it through the weekend. So if we can make it through the weekend with 315, then we ought to be able to do this afternoon with just a few people. The other thing I want to tell you is this. I grew up in Statesville. Anybody in here from churches around Statesville?
Real close.
Salisbury. John, this pastor was a member of that same church. He's a little younger than I am, but he was a member.
A lot younger.
A member of that same congregation. But when I was growing up, a generation before Pastor Boyd was growing up, everybody in Statesville thought the same way, believed the same way, had the same values, and did the same thing. It didn't really matter. So by the time I hit 7th grade, we believed at that time that the way you could get grown real fast was to smoke. Cigarettes now, we hadn't heard of the other stuff yet. Okay? So you just had to smoke, and we formed this smoking club. And in order to get in the smoking club, you had to go to the drugstore. There was only one right there on the town square, and you had to go in and you had to buy a pack of cigarettes. Now in those days, they didn't have the laws that said you couldn't sell cigarettes to minors because we could go buy them for our parents. So everybody that was going to join this smoking club, 7th graders at DMAT Compton Junior High, had to go to the drugstore and buy a pack of cigarettes. Well, a lot of them had parents who smoked. So they could just go say, my dad sent me down, my mom sent me down with cigarettes. Neither of my parents smoked. So I had to lie a little bit. So I went down and I said, my aunt and uncle were in town and they had sent me down to buy a pack of Lucky Strikes. That's how come I'm so short. So the druggist sold them to me. I went home and I got about 1 foot in the back door, and my dad said, I didn't know Marvin and Roberta were in town. And the druggist had called my dad. The druggist had called my dad. That's the kind of world I lived in. Come on in, folks.
People said, Lord, we're not really a very sophisticated people. We're a very simple people. We aren't great soldiers. We aren't great architects or engineers. We don't have a lot of artists. And we certainly don't have a lot of great thinkers and all. You see, we're a nation of storytellers. And if you were to be our God and we were to be your people, we would keep your story alive. We would tell one generation to another your story, and that way people would come to know you.
But you could change that text. You don't have to use the word in the green book. The entrance hymn can be a hymn out of the book. It can be maybe a contemporary song like we sing this now, Thy Word. And some churches actually sing that in their worship regularly. But you can change that. You can pick whatever hymn you want with your pastor's advice. The Kyrie and the hymn of praise, I wouldn't mess with that too much. I would try to leave that intact. And if you have good singers in your church, you might want to have them intone the service instead of the pastor.
Lutherans don't evangelize that way. Now, where I live and work is in Columbia, South Carolina, and there used to be a Lutheran church supply store on one corner, and across the street on another corner was a Baptist hospital, and in between there was a bus stop. Every time I went either to the hospital or to the church supply store, there was this distinguished, well, somewhat distinguished looking man with balding, whitish hair, and a kind of rumpled suit. He would stand around that bus stop holding these posters that had crudely printed Bible verses on them, and he was just Well, he was basically yelling so that he could be heard. But he was so excited in what he believed that he would stand on that street corner and preach to his captive audience. Captive audience? Yeah, they were sitting there waiting for the bus. He took advantage of that to make them into a congregation, and he tried to preach to them about sin, about death, about hell. He tried to scare them into believing what he believed. And he did that while they were waiting for the bus.
But you never know how much youth ministry is going to pick up the message through the individual youth. That's what we're here for today. As advisors and leaders, we're here to help put the pieces together, to help form a youth ministry that can go out and evangelize. Last night we asked the youth, if you're going out to evangelize, what are you going out for? What exactly are you going to do? Their response is, we're going to have a good time with our friends in fellowship. We're going to go out in the schools and we're going to share the Christ. We're not ashamed of the faith that we have and we want to share it. They're proud of it. How many times can you look at yourself and look in the mirror and look at the youth and say, you at this church make a difference? That's something that you need to think about. The other thing that's so fantastic, we came together today and we talked about evangelism, and we come up with a short definition. The winning or revival is a personal commitment to Christ. There again is a large thing to undertake. You can come up with a commitment to Christ that can only last a day or two, or you can come up with one that's going to last for many years. But the youth that we have now, as you can see by the attendance that we have had today, Christ is in their life. He is here in the midst of them. And with their Father, they are doing great things just for the fun of it.
And live that strength. If you're going to say power, feel it. Because it's the kind of power that only God can give. Okay, let's try it. Here we go. Ready from the beginning. Ready? First verse again. Ready? All right, right there. Right there, you're answering. You're saying one thing. There's power in the cross. And if you come along, would we be free from our boasting and pride? And how wonderful it would be when we can stand over somebody and say, well, I got this, and I've been here, and I go there. Boastful. What does that say to others? Not a thing. See, we can see through that. All right, but then the refrain, there's power in the cross. Bring that up every time you say it. Ready, here we go. Don't look as if you're half dead. Ready, here we go.
great privilege for me today to be able to present to you the Bishop of the ELCA and his wife, the Reverend Dr. Herman W. Chilstrom and the Reverend E. Kareem Chilstrom. I ask you to give them a Charlotte welcome.
Thank you very much. And thanks for ordering such a marvelous weekend to come to North Carolina. I could feel the warmth as the plane was descending Friday night. Wonderful to be back in the Carolinas. I don't enjoy a certain part of my work, and that is almost constant travel. I left Chicago last Sunday and flew to Florida for an evangelism conference, and up to New York to do some filming and to attend a meeting for the cable network we're trying to put together among religious organizations. And yesterday in Washington, or rather Friday in Washington, Friday night came down here. But yesterday was really a very neat day for me because we're doing some filming for Mission 90. And we chose as one of the places where we want to do some filming the village of Belmont, which is not far from here. Anybody here from Belmont? There they are, one or two. There they are, way in the back. Anyway, we had a wonderful time out of Belmont doing some filming in kind of a small town setting and getting a good taste of what life is like in that part of North Carolina. And then, of course, to be with you as a team for the evangelism event is also a real privilege. It's kind of a first for us. We've never kind of operated as a team to do things like this. Corinne travels a lot in the church, speaking at conferences and retreats of all kinds, and I do the same. But this was an invitation to do it together, and we thank you for that, so that we could be here in the Carolinas with you. I do want to say that having youth events around the country is a real plus for me. There are some folks who are a little bit pessimistic about the future of all the churches in this country. And I must say that when I come to events like this and catch the spirit of a group like this, where they said we might get 50, and we got over 500, that says to me that the future of this church is in very good hands. I also want to say, however, that you should resist whenever anyone says to you as young people, you are the church of the future, because you are also the church of today. That every one of us who's been baptized in Jesus Christ is a very important part of the church of our Lord Jesus. And you have the privilege and the responsibility, along with everyone, no matter how old they are, of being a part of this church. So thank you for setting up this event so that we could share with the youth of this area as well. Now, our assignment for this period is to kind of tell our story of faith. And we're grateful for that too, because we know that people have kind of strange ideas about who bishops are, what makes them tick, and where they came from, and probably the same about a bishop's wife, and especially if she happens to be ordained. And so we really are happy to be able to sit here for a few minutes and simply tell you the story of how our faith has come alive through the years, and maybe a few of the events in life that have made a special impact on us. And I hope that maybe it'll help you to realize that not only are we very ordinary Christian people, but that if you feel ordinary, that you're very normal, and that God is at work in your life as well. I'm going to ask Corinne now to tell a little bit about her background and her story of faith.
Well, I want to say thank you, too, for the privilege to be with you today. I always love to be with you. You're all, each of you, so special. It's fun to be with the McDaniels. We've had lots of times together, serious times and times when we've laughed very hard together. It's good to be with them today here and to feel their welcome. I grew up in a family of 5 siblings on a farm in South Dakota. We raised wheat and oats and lots of corn and fattened cattle and pigs and raised chickens. So we ate very well. Also worked out on the farm a lot as I grew up, so I love the outdoors. Always have, and I think always will. I went then into nurses training after high school. It happened that my father said to me when I wanted to go to college, no, you don't need college because you will no doubt get married someday. We had good communication, but it was only one way. So I never said anything more. And I did what a woman could easily do, and that was, one of those things was to be a nurse. And I think I was a very good one, and I loved it. But I always knew that there was something else going on. But along the way, lots of things happened. And those are the kinds of things that we want to dip in today to tell you something about our faith journey. You know, when you take a trip, a lot of the journey is just kind of driving down the road. But then there are very special parts of the journey where you stop and see some sights, or you have wonderful special experiences. And that's, I think, what our whole life journey is like. Oftentimes it's very mundane and regular, but then there are the high points and the special things that happen to you. And so one of the first ones that I want to tell you about was when I was 11 years old. Sometimes adults look at kids as though not a great deal is happening, but a lot of times when we're young, especially, well, I think all of life, but especially when we're young, we mask some of the important things that are happening in our lives. And I can remember very clearly some special things that happened behind a face, I think, that didn't show it a lot when I was your age and even younger. When I was about 11 years old, I don't know what all the circumstances were that made that happen, but I was feeling more and more very afraid of God. Have you ever felt afraid of God? Well, I did, and it seemed to bother me the most when I was going to sleep at night, when I was all alone upstairs. Being the youngest, all of my older sisters and brothers had left home, and I was alone upstairs at night. And I didn't remember, it got worse and worse until one night I couldn't go to sleep, and I went over to the stairway and called my mother. I'm sure she thought that I was probably ill. I asked her, will you come up? And so she came upstairs, and no, I'm not ill, but I feel afraid of God. And she was surprised because she had never seen that in me or known that was happening. But I loved and trusted my mother very much, and so I dared to tell her that, and I needed her help. And part of the reason I'm telling you this story is that when we have feelings like that, we need to call somebody that we love and trust very much and open our hearts to that person. Because there are lots of people, for every one of you in this church today, who love you very much, who would like to help you anytime you need some help. Well, my mother did that night. You know, it isn't strange, I guess, that we feel afraid of God, because in our hearts, there is sin, every one of us. It is there. Not only do we do wrong things, but by our very nature, we turn away from God. And so we are afraid in God's presence, and rightly so. But what she told me that night, I'll never forget. She quoted her favorite Bible verse, which is, if we confess our sin to God, is faithful and just and will forgive us all of our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And she said, we will ask Jesus to be your friend and help you to believe that he has forgiven you for all of your sins and that you can know him always as your friend. And I still remember kneeling beside my bed with my mother that night. I didn't know how to pray And so she did, and asked God for that to happen to me. Now, I'd been baptized. Jesus was already in my heart, but I needed to know Jesus in a bigger way than I knew him yet. And that happened. God does answer our prayers. And somehow the moonlight streaming in the window, and we didn't have any light on. We had plenty of light with the moon. It was almost like that light just filled my heart with a new understanding of the presence of Jesus in my life. And I learned that night that Jesus is my friend. And that was a very special lesson to learn. Now, what are you going to tell next?
I got so caught up in your story, I forgot. Where can I begin? I'm a native of Minnesota. My parents were living on a farm at the time I was born. When I was 4, they moved into a town of about 4,000 people. My father worked for the city. Every night, about 1 o'clock, he'd get up and go down to the fire station, and he had a little 2-wheel cart with a shovel and a broom, and he would sweep the streets of the city from one end to the other with a broom, and then come home and sleep during the day. We were a large family. You won't believe it, but my parents had 2.5 dozen children. Believe it or not, 2 boys and 6 girls. That's 2.5 dozen. I don't know if that's new math or the old math, but that's still a lot of kids. I have 1 brother and 6 sisters, and we grew up in a house with 2 bedrooms. But fortunately, the older ones moved out by the time the younger ones were born. But it was quite a zoo, I would say, to grow up in a family like that. We had a lot of fun, though. It was a solid Christian family. When I got into junior high school, I started to grow rather rapidly and was fairly well coordinated, so basketball was everything. And the only relationship with God I remember at that time was kind of the same thing Corrine mentioned, sort of like, I don't really measure up. And so I would say, Lord, forgive me of my sins. And by the way, help me to make the basketball team. And when I made the basketball team, I felt I really had God shining on me, and that was wonderful. And I breezed through confirmation, and all the time through confirmation, I had the thought, well, now when this is over, I'll go through the confirmation right, and I'll sort of be a man then, and I'll tell my folks, once a month the church is enough for me. I want to sleep in. I want to go to late movies on Saturday night and go on dates and things, and so I'll sleep in Sunday morning. Well, along about the time I was about to be confirmed, my friends talked about going to Bible camp. And the more they talked about it, the more interested I got, because they talked about all the good-looking girls that would be there from other towns. So I thought, that's the place to go. So off I went to Bible camp. And God had something else in store. I did meet some good-looking girls, by the way. But more important, I met Jesus Christ in a deeper way. I say deeper because I know from my baptism I was a child of God. There's no question about that. But this was a time to take a deeper step. And it was during that week in a camp setting and away from home, as the teachers were sharing out of the Bible and teaching me new insights into Scripture. And at night, as the counselors in the cabin would tell what it meant for them to be Christian, and I really began to think more deeply about things. And I remember one night in particular, when we had evening prayers, and they sort of said to each of us, why don't you say a little prayer? Well, besides saying, now I lay me down to sleep, and our Father who art in heaven, I hadn't known about any other kind of prayer, but except basketball.